Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I am Brian Dietmeyer, and today I'm really lucky to be with Jonathan Kvarfordt. And Jonathan is a busy guy. he's head of go-to-market, revenue enablement, and product marketing at Symmetric. He's also founder of his own business, the Go-to-Market AI Academy. And as I get it, it's helping go-to-market professionals leverage AI in their field. Is that directionally accurate?
You got it, man. That's
Cool.
it.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So today we're talking about at a high level what you and I were calling the disruption of revenue or the disruption of sales enablement.
Yeah.
So in the pre-interview, we talked a little bit about that, and you talked about let me look back at my notes that we need to rethink everything. So I found that a little bit compelling. So why do you think enablement needs to be disrupted?
Well, first, just thank you for letting me be involved. Like I'm a big fan of you and just what you're doing, and so I just want to say first off, thank you for that. As far as disruption inside of sales enablement, I've been inside of sales since I was 15. I sold back when before SaaS was a thing, and have sold both enterprise and small things. And then I moved into enablement about 11, 12 years ago, and I've seen a lot of changes in that time, and especially now with the shift from a lot of market changes from just how prospecting is done and how people are outreaching to companies and what people are not doing and how they're actually engaging with companies in the first place in the sales cycle or buying cycle.
Yeah.
All the way to AI and how people are using AI and their functionality and where we're going to be going with AI and what's going to be shifting. It's going to cause a lot of disruption specifically for enablement in both those aspects. So I'm really kind of curious what's going to go. I have just my ideas, but I think the need is one other thing to go with that. Sorry about that. Earlier this year, I was laid off, and at the same time, my company laid off our sales or half the sales team, 3 or 4 VPs of sales.
Yeah.
I was laid off, and in that time, I don't know how many people I saw posts daily from a lot of enablement people specifically saying they got laid off, and then this conversation came up, which it has always, of like, what's the value of enablement?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we prove that? How do we show that?
Yeah.
And it's one of these spaces that it's difficult because it usually has to do with behaviors, and how to measure behaviors is not an easy thing to shift, and then to say it's because of enablement that those behaviors shifted, because there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I think that because of that, and because at least in the enablement community, there are some who are, it's kind of a weird array of people from marketing to education to sales. And so the background and what people focus on is so different. But the market itself is saying we got to have more from enablement to make it worthwhile to have as a function.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it totally does. Yep. And I wonder, like, if so, that's kind of pretty like a lot has to happen is kind of what I'm hearing. But what do you think if you were to get to the top couple things to say, look, these are 2 things that would probably start getting enablement moving in the right direction? What do you think those things would be?
Well, honestly, it comes down to a couple of things. One, that enablement has a little bit more of authority, or at least a voice in some of the decisions being made, instead of being the receiver of that. That would require or infer that enablement has a strategic function and not just I'm here to make you happy function.
Yes.
So what I mean by that is a specific example is if a sales leader comes to me and says, hey, I heard this discovery call. It was horrible. We should train on discovery. And I'll be like, why? What data do you have showing that? You have one call. We have 400 a week. Tell me why we should change all of our training because of that. And if we do that, what are we measuring to show that any training we do would actually impact the result you're looking for?
Yeah.
Or is it just an individual coaching need?
Yep.
So it's that kind of thing where most of the time enablement doesn't have the authority or ability to push back and then have the data to back it up and say, based on what I'm seeing from a holistic view, yes, that's important, but it's not as important as this, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too. The authority thing. Like I've heard this a couple of times in conversations with people lately. We should be C-level, that kind of thing, and that's to me kind of a lagging indicator, right? It's like we need to earn that authority, and being I think more prescriptive and less reactive and more data driven. That's what I kind of heard you say in your previous response, right? Because I think the authority is a function of we're doing things different, better. We're bringing strategies to you versus reacting to what you're throwing at me. Yep.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there, Jonathan, there's, the shift, as you know, sales enablement society is now revenue enablement society. And I'm wondering,
Yeah.
kind of beyond the name change, how you view that. Is that like, what's behind that name change? What's the difference between sales enablement and revenue enablement?
Funny enough, there's some people who think they're literally the same thing, but to me,
Yes.
they're not.
Yeah.
What it comes down to is pretty simply is that sales enablement is specifically for the sales function,
Yes.
and that it's more focused on the seller being supported. Whereas revenue enablement is two things. One, it's focusing on any revenue or customer facing team member, so CSMs, BDRs, everybody, and making sure
Yeah.
they're in line and sync with messaging and training and all that stuff. And two, that the buyer's journey is just as important as the seller CSM's experience.
Yeah.
That's the difference I'm seeing, is that the shift is going more towards what does the buyer care about? What are they thinking? What are they saying? What's their experience? And that leads all of the strategy working backwards. Instead of saying, how can I help this salesperson sell more? It's more like, how can I help this buyer do their buyer experience better or buy
Yeah.
more?
Yeah.
If I think that way, then the training, everything else work backwards just kind of follows.
It's funny because I've been doing research on this too, and I mean, this is, I've read a lot of articles, and some of them almost bordering on sort of scholarly, but there was one
Right.
article where they said there's a difference when you switch the words. This really got to me. There's a difference between enabling sales and enabling revenue. Right? And I think when it's the other way, when it's sales enablement or revenue enablement, it's like the nickel didn't drop, but revenue, like the whole life cycle, right? Down
Yeah.
down to renewal and customer sat. That that's a pretty massive shift. That's cross functional, right? That's different chops for a revenue enablement leader, I think, than a sales enablement leader. To me,
Right.
this is
Yes.
it's directionally the right shift, but it's a seismic shift. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And there's still people who focus just on sales because that's, either because that's what the CRO knows or that's
Yes.
just because what everyone knows. But like, even in my own role, it's something I had to teach the founders about because they're like,
Yes.
we want you to do sales enablement. I'm like, I'm not coming here for sales. I'll come here for revenue. I will not come for just sales. And they said, well, what's the difference? I said,
Yeah.
this is the difference. And now being here and seeing some of the drastic changes they made in the team, there's been times where I've said, this is why I'm here, is because of this reason, because of
Right.
some sort of team dynamics not working or the process is broken or something. But unless you have someone who's responsible to making sure that's happening, you'll miss it because it's just so siloed. And C levels aren't always having the pulse of that. They see symptoms, they don't
Yeah.
always have the pulse. Like enablement is one of these cool places where I know the heartbeat of almost every team in the company because I'm involved with every team in the company,
Yeah.
And so the perspective we have is pretty unique because we can just see the bigger picture and we also get into the weeds to fix whatever might be happening.
Yeah. So it's not going to come top down, right? Leaders aren't going to come to us and say become
Yeah.
revenue enablers. It's up to us to pull that strategy up and again be more prescriptive to say this is a
Yeah.
better solution for the company. Yeah, that's it
Yes.
it makes me think of long time ago in my career. I built a national account organization when national account selling, global account, strategic accounts, that function was new and different from sales. And I
Right.
became involved with the Strategic Account Management Association, who was, I think, much like the Revenue Enablement Society, kind of leading that shift. And it's funny, I watched that, 20 years ago, like executives saying, what is account management? How is that different than sales? How much is it going to cost me? What's the
Right.
business impact of it all? And I did watch them over a period of time do a really great job of even defining what it is, right? A common definition. Now there's everybody knows what account management is as differentiated from just selling and opportunity management. So, but that wasn't it. I feel like revenue enablement is in a similar spot that account
Yes.
management was probably 20 years ago. And a lot of that was led by the industry groups like the Revenue Enablement Society, giving people the tools and the
Right.
chops and the blueprints to get there. Does that sound?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds very familiar. Like what's funny about this, I'm thinking ahead of where we are because to me the conversation of revenue versus sales enablement is a 5 year ago discussion. for me. But it's
Yeah.
funny that it keeps coming up. Like the Sales Enablement Society just barely changed. I'm like, I had that discussion a while ago. Where have you
Right.
guys been?
Right.
I'm glad it's happening, but it's, to me, it's old news. I'm thinking ahead of like saying, okay, like I posted about this on LinkedIn, like the purpose of enablement is to improve performance of teams, whether
Yeah.
that's through systems, training, coaching, whatever that is, it's improved performance, right? And when you think about that as a whole level, if I was a CEO, I would want to have someone totally responsible over the improvement of performance for everybody,
Yeah.
not just the customer facing team. So my thought is I want to go the direction of how does enablement become enablement of the entire company, not just the GTM teams. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah,
So
for sure. And I think we could all learn, and those in leadership roles in the field could learn from the account management journey. I mean, it's always helpful to look at
yeah,
people who they shifted and introduced and found a way to,
right,
how do you tie compensation to this stuff, and what's
right,
the ROI? That a lot of those analytics and that blueprint, I think, needs to be built so then it can be scaled. So, the
yeah,
one thing I haven't heard as I've talked to people about this shift is I feel like one thing that would make the function more relevant is to be the strategy execution arm. There's a lot,
yeah,
there's a lot of corporate strategy that cannot be executed by reps, right? We've got a cost reduction strategy, we've got an acquisition strategy, but there's an awful lot that can be executed one deal at a time by reps. And I haven't heard a lot of that. And I just wonder how you feel about it, because I feel like that's the argument to a CEO, right? Is that we're really here to execute strategy. Just wondering your thoughts on that.
yeah. I think that conversation needs to happen more, but I also think that the community as a whole needs to understand that that's what it's for. Because otherwise, I think that the community itself is not even aligned on what, what we're supposed to be doing. I have my
Right.
opinion,
Right.
but it's not like I don't even know what to compare it to. But it's like I feel like in go to market anyways that people understand a good head of sales should be doing this function. A good head of RevOps should be doing this function.
Yeah.
A good head of revenue enablement, we don't know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like we gotta get clear on what that is because even the community is like, we don't know what that is. But yeah,
Yeah. So I want to transition a little bit. There was something
sure.
else you and I began talking about the other day, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, and I want to drill down. So we're going to kind of go. I think this has been pretty strategic. Like, how do we shift an
Yeah,
entire function
sure.
in an industry? But you mentioned, my question to you on our pre-interview is, what should people stop doing? And you said people should stop doing theoretical based training and focus more on application. I have a really strong view on that, but I want to hear where you were going with that.
Yeah. Both as an ex seller and then now as the person kind of responsible for training, I cannot stand theory.
Yep.
I want to show someone how to actually do it. When someone says, this is how you should close someone is like this, I'm like, show me,
Yeah.
show me, let me see that. And so every place I've gone to, I rely a lot on actually showing examples and not only showing them so they can see what we're trying to accomplish, not just theoretically, but let me show you what like I'll give you an example. My head of sales, we just did a methodology training.
Yeah.
And he took a company through a discovery and he literally used the methodology we trained on to a T. And I was like, this is exactly what I needed.
Yes.
So now I can send it to the team like, watch our leader do exactly what I'm asking you to do in real time with the customer. So it's not just theoretical. It's like, this is how it's applied. So that's number one. Number two is that training is not just presenting decks and materials or content. It's about, now that you've seen a good example, let's apply it. Let's chunk it down. What's the first thing he said? What's the question the customer asked or thing that he said? And let's practice the next phrase. My team's unique with Symmetric because I'm not unique, but the challenge we have is that I have English, Spanish, and Portuguese speakers.
Okay.
So when we do practice, I have to do them in each language. So it's like I have to translate it into English everyone understands, and then we go actually apply it and practice in chunks based on whatever scenario we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'd rather spend more time doing that than spend an hour on a deck of what theoretically you could do sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. I was speaking with Alyssa Plekovic, who's the global enablement person for Checkpoint Technologies, and she used the phrase context base. We need to get away
Yes.
from methodology, what I call blank form methodology. Here's here's your purple sheet, fill it in. Here's your medic plan, fill it in. To
Yeah.
context based. To me, and this might sound basic, if you have a Miller Hyman blue sheet or a medic plan, those are helpful. They guide you. The methodology guides you.
Yeah.
The magic to me is the answers that goes into those forms. That brings it into context. That brings it into your value,
Right.
your competitors, your marketplace, what's happening in the region of the world that you're in. And I feel like that's where the value is, and that's where training, when we talk about context based, who in your opinion, who is who's responsible for moving from what I would call blank form methodology, theoretical, to context based training for reps? Is that the consultants who are selling it to you? Is it sales enablement?
It's a good question, because I think it's kind of both. I think
Yeah.
now, especially because of AI, and I know you and I could nerd out on AI stuff for a while,
Yes.
but like this is where I think one of the biggest disruptions is going to happen in training in general, whether it's
Yeah.
enablement or from consultants, is the context. Like,
Yes.
how do we take this and actually apply it to a specific customer, specific pains, persona levels, industry, product? How do we
Yes.
actually apply all the methodology to the real world?
Yep.
Because there's this huge gap. Like, I know this because I've literally gone through this just a month ago. We rolled out this massive methodology training, but now I'm in the middle of like, okay, how do I apply this to a bank and a CFO? Or how do I apply this to a PSP at the
Right.
manager level? Or how
Right.
do I make sure that happens? And that is a monumental, massive task to think about all the situations. But AI is a piece that can do it quick. You say,
Yeah.
based on this methodology and this person and the profile, blam, here's some of your recommendations based on what you're doing, and here's what you
Boom.
need to
Boom.
improve
You're
on,
right.
which
And that
takes
that
out a human out of that.
yes. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
happens before the event. So then when the event comes and you're doing the training, yeah, and it's maybe,
Right.
for anybody who's listening, this again is not a subtle shift. I think methodology training has been rolled out, probably hasn't changed in 25 years. Okay, we're going to announce it at SKO, and then we're going to do the either national
Right.
or global rollout next year, and everybody sits through the 2-day classes, and then then it's like, how do we put it in context and how do we make it stick? Those have been kind of secondary discussions, and I feel like no, context and stick are the thing.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the stickiness. Like, people focus so much on the. It's kind of like what we're seeing with home market with around the spray and pray model with some of these companies and where we're going. Like, it's
Yes.
shifting drastically, but it's a good direction to where we should have been in the first place.
And
So it's kind of like people focus on the original implementation of it, but then the next 9 months to a year of actually sticking it is like, they're like, oh well, have fun.
yes. Yeah.
Hope it works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was actually, there was a Forbes article that mentioned that about companies' approach to training is spray and pray. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's how it's been. And most people I talk to are not very happy with that approach, but they haven't seen the alternative. And I think you're right. There's enabling technology out there now to contextualize this stuff and then do it in context. And the methodology then
Yeah.
is underlying versus the thing, which I think is cool. Yeah, it's I founded a negotiation training business 20 years ago, and we had our methodology. I partnered up with a Harvard professor, and we went out
Right.
and delivered the methodology. And I ended up buying him out because about 7 or 8 years ago, we went from, and it's not a commercial for that business because I'm not there anymore. So we went from teaching people how to negotiate, which is what you were talking earlier, to teaching how do you negotiate your value for this solution against this competitor, maybe in this region of the world. How do you achieve
Right.
these commercial terms? We have a case study on this. We're working with Ryder Truck down to the level of commercial terms. They were saying, we want more fuel escalation clauses in our contracts. So how do we train people how to, because that's
How do
going
you
to
train on
impact
that?
our margin. Yeah. How do we train on that? Not, you could
Yeah.
easily go, okay, let me train you on give gets. No, 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 no. Let me train you on the dialogue about what are you trading to get fuel escalation in and reduce some of our, our pricing risk and our margin risk associated with that. I feel like that's the shift. And again,
Yeah.
this is a massive shift, just like the other shift we talked about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think too that when you think about the personalization piece as well, so that when I can match not only how the conversation with the customer should work, but I can match that to specific strengths, weaknesses, competencies of the person or their profile. So if I have a salesperson who who has a certain style of selling, the way I would coach them would drastically shift from another person who may sell differently. The
Yeah.
methodology might be the same, but the approach, the strategy, the strengths, weaknesses, all that stuff will totally change, which requires my time as a coach to understand that. But if you could automate that process, so you had a personality profile from an AI, and then matching it with the context you're talking about to the persona, the product, the level, the stage, all that's automatic, and then you get real-time feedback. Like that's something where, again, I don't want to say take humans out of it because you'll still need a human involved.
Right.
But that process historically has required a human to interject themselves at every piece of that process.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have to do that anymore. We're going into a whole new world where I'm like really, really excited about it because I think it's going to be better for the seller and for the buyer as far as the experience.
Yeah. These words have been around for a while, just in time enablement, but I feel like that's what we're talking about because it hasn't, the concept's been there and it hasn't been executed. And I'll share with you a story. I was speaking with an SVP at a logistics company who bought one of their biggest competitors in Europe. And I asked him, how long before words are coming out of reps' mouths that against your nearest competitor that leverage and monetize this acquisition you just made, right? Leveraging your new competitive footprint. And he said, best case scenario, 6 months, likely 9 to 12. Right. If you take some, I mean, I feel like that's what we should be enabling people to do. How do you leverage that? We just spent whatever, a couple $1 billion on this acquisition. How quickly can we monetize it?
Right.
Methodology is not going to get us there. Context based will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You think about the power behind some of those drastic changes like that. Like if you had the possibility of that kind of change shifting into 3 to 4 months, because I personally believe behaviors can be shifted in a quarter. That's my belief. Because it takes time. Like humans need time to shift. But if you do it right, you can do it in 3 months.
Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah.
And you see real impact of it within 6. But if you don't do it right, then it takes a good year to see that kind of shift.
Yeah. And I was speaking to Jim Dickey, who you might know, who's an industry analyst. And he was saying, there's this thing, it's announced at SKO. We just made this acquisition or we just loaded, we just rolled out this new software and everybody goes back and sells the old thing. And then management looks around and says, well, why are they still selling the old thing? And his point, he had a really street level point about the risk that a rep takes when the words are coming out of their mouth for the first time in front of a customer. And these are different words than the words they've been saying for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And it's kind of back to that context based thing. My argument is the first time you say it to a customer should be your 4th time. Right, you should have practiced that context 3 times,
right?
That's his argument about why a lot of these things don't get executed at the deal level is because there's just too much risk and there's not enough of that just-in-time enablement, that context enablement to practice that, which is a little different than role playing. I mean, this is real practice of leveraging your new value prop.
Yes.
Yeah. They're massive.
We talked about that for a while. Was that whole role play versus practice thing? So we could definitely talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think if I recall correctly, I've been paid to stand on stage and speak to people, and I think you said this when I'm in a session and I hear role play, I panic. Right? And most people do, and I was so glad to hear you say that, and I think that's different than like context-based, like rehearsing or practice. It's like, no, this isn't a theoretical role play where you're out of your comfort zone. This is, we're talking about this new value proposition we have and how do we now leverage this against competitors? What are the key points of that? Yeah. And
totally.
A lot of data, and decks came from marketing on that acquisition, for example. And, it's what we all know is marketing is one to many, and we have to practice one-to-one granular level sales conversations. Yeah. And I think that's where the challenge comes in.
Totally. I think personally speaking, that's where some of the theoretical versus application stuff comes in, is because you go through some sort of theoretical role play if this could happen or not, versus, like you said, I want what they say to be not the first time with the customer. It should be with me in a safe space, and the challenge is that the space we provide people is not safe to mess up. We have to say, do it exactly like this. And then someone critiques them and says, well, you didn't do that right because of this thing. And it's like, no. It's about practicing getting the mess out first so that the fine-tuned version comes later. Yeah. And that's the piece I think most people miss, is because they're just trying to make it perfect the first time around. It's like, that's not what practice is for. Practice is to mess up so you can get better, and then you do it right in person, you know?
Yeah, it's so it occurred. So our subject was kind of just disrupting or rethinking sales enablement, revenue enablement, and
Right.
on the big strategic level. Just looking back at my notes here, there it's our job to bring that up to the senior leadership level, but we need to define it. We need a
Yeah.
blueprint. What is it? What's the spend look like? What's the return look like? And how's that going to help
Right.
execute company strategy? I mean, we've got to make a pretty damn compelling argument, especially if we're looking at the entire customer lifecycle and the cross functional
Right.
nature of all that. That's a massive
Totally.
shift, but doable. And then the other shift we're talking about is kind of generic methodology down to context stuff. That's like one small piece within the sales enablement piece part, which is
Yeah.
also, I think, a really big shift, which again can be enabled. I think one of the reasons methodology companies didn't do it is because of profit. If I can go sell that methodology kind of over and over and over again and let the reps fill out
Yeah.
the form, then the margins are high. But you're right that AI is now enabling us to be able to put it, contextualize it before we roll it out. And I think that's a way to make that second shift come alive. And I do agree with you. It's a combination of, I'm glad to hear you say it. It's not, I've had a couple enablement folks say, well, it's kind of on us and it's on marketing and contextualize it. No, I think it's a redefinition of the people that are consultants providing those services to say, this is what we're doing.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah, there's been with what we just rolled out before. It was with I could tell you what it is, but I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But it's a classic methodology. My team needed the structure, so it was definitely a good thing for us to go through.
Yes.
But the methodology of how they're actually applying the content and the frameworks is
Yeah.
what I actually gave some pretty blunt feedback to them, saying, "This is old school. This is 15 years ago. What are you guys
Yes.
doing? Like this is not the way to train." You know, but it's always pushing the envelope and thinking, how can I do this better? And is this impacting? Is this actually being applied in real life? And if it's not, then you have to be willing to shift what you're doing.
Yes. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I've talked to so many people on this topic that they say, yeah, SKO announcement, rollout, and then
Yeah.
and then nothing. And that's the accepted legacy practice that I'm going to say has been happening for 25 years or
A
more.
long time.
That it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't shifted all that much. Yeah, this is cool. It's exciting because I think AI being one of the leads. There's enablers for both of these shifts that we're talking about. So maybe
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that these the context stuff has been talked about and the shift in sales enablement has been talked about, and we
Well,
haven't moved as quickly as we want, but now it's there. The enabling technology is there.
I have a question for you because I know I'm not interviewing you, but I'm generally a question because I'm thinking about this too. So on, you know, the whole process of like lots of money on SKO, group events, one-on-one coaching, blah, 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 blah. What if that was totally, I'm not saying we should do this, but what if there's a way you could replace it with AI? So the practice was done in AI, they get feedback with AI. Oh, look, cool little thing here. You have all this stuff happen with AI,
Yeah.
or at least a lot of it happens there. So like it takes away the need of the old school SKO, follow-ups, group practice, all this other stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the case, but we have to think in that direction of like, what if what we're doing is not the way we could or should be doing it to make it most effective? Like that's where disruption comes, is saying, what have we done? Is it working? What's a totally new way of thinking of how we could do this? And would that work? I don't know, but let's try it. You know?
Yeah. It man, I have a long answer to that question, but I wanted to a qualifier up front. I don't want this show to be a pitch for what I do. That
Yeah.
being said, I'm going to share with you just our thinking in general, because you asked the question. Ninety
I want
percent,
to know. Yeah, please.
yeah, 90% of the focus of this training stuff is on the events. Who's the consultant? What's your methodology? And then 10% is, oh, what happens after the consultant leaves? How do we, who's going to coach it? Managers don't
Right.
have time to coach it. Who's going to contextualize it? Our argument is that needs to be flipped. 90% of the
Yes.
energy should be on one-to-one coaching in context, and 10% on
Right.
skill acquisition. And as we've talked about, the enabling technology for that is AI. AI can
Right.
I was a human coach, and I had human coaches on my team, and we coached $1 billion of renewals at a Fortune 10 tech company. It was very expensive for that company. It was very
Yeah.
difficult for me to scale. I was trying to find more and more consultants that could play at that level, work on a 10 or $20 million deal, coaching people who were pros at
Right.
this. That was very difficult for both of us to scale. It was effective, and AI and technology allows us to scale that now, right? Where that's
Right.
my new definition of skills training is the 90%. It's one-to-one, deal specific, context specific coaching for
Context based. Yep.
365 days. And what we've
Right.
learned in doing this is the skill acquisition part, which is most of what methodology training is. It's skill acquisition, not skill practice or application. The skill
Mm-hmm.
acquisition lift is much lighter. Like if I'm going to only see you for 2 days, I'm gonna drown you with my fire hose for 2 days with everything that I
Right.
know about
Yeah.
doing this thing, whatever it is. But if I'm going to see you 50, 75, 100 times on 100 deals over the next year, I just need to
Mm-hmm.
give you some of the basics up front, and then all that pull through. And that's a complete upside down, from the 90-10, where 90% of the effort is in context, one-to-one deal application, and it's available to us today. And I think
Right.
that's the big shift. And I think we'll look back at this moment in time and say this is where methodology, like, jumped the shark, to use
Yeah.
a Happy Days phrase.
Well, I'm glad you said it because the event based thing is like a perfect way to kind of summarize saying this is what we have done. I don't think it's working. Like
Yeah,
it's okay, but there's better ways to do it that is more, again, buyer and seller or CSM or whoever facing, more friendly to those
yeah.
people because it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, and it's the reality is that it's always been thought that frontline sales leaders were going to coach, and that's a really nice idea. Frontline sales leaders, they don't have the time for it. Some don't have the chops, and and
Yeah.
and so, I've heard people saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to train our frontline sales leaders how to coach," which is probably fine. So that helps the people that don't have the chops. They still don't have the time. And this is an ideal thing for a frontline sales manager to do. But the cool
Right.
thing, if you start leveraging AI, you can sort of pre-coach some of this stuff. And I was talking to a sales lead at a tech company that said, if deals came to me sort of pre-coached by AI, I could 3 to 5x.
Yeah.
I could 3 to 5x the number of deals that I touch. Because he said a really interesting thing to me. I spend half of my one-on-one downloading the basic data of the deal. Who is it? Who are we selling to? Let's look at
Right.
your coverage map and what are our strengths and weaknesses. And he's like, if that all could come to me, and because there still is a human piece. So in this 90-10 shift that I believe the world is going to, there still needs to be a handoff to the frontline manager, but it's pre-coached. and
Mhm.
and then that frontline
Right.
manager, he or she, gets to double or triple click on that thing and make those sessions much much more effective, because anyone who's
Yeah.
done a bunch of coaching, anyone who's listening, who's a frontline leader who's done coaching, it all follows a pattern. Like a lot of the holes in the missing
Yeah.
data is all similar, and the whole thing follows a pattern. So if we can cover a lot of that busy work kind of up front and then do the real strategic application later, I think it's a combination of the AI and the human coach then that really makes it sing.
I think that's the difference is that a lot of people are thinking it's an either or thing. And I'm always like, no, it's a human AI powered. There's a big difference between human or AI or human AI powered. Big
Yes.
difference,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I meant, sorry, Jonathan.
Oh, it's
I
okay. Go ahead.
mentioned,
Go ahead.
I mentioned Jim Dickey earlier at Sales Mastery, and he released some research a while back that said when you combine the tech with the human coaching, there's a 30-point lift in your existing, not 30 points of increased close rate, but a 30-point lift in your existing close rate, which is a pretty damn
Yeah.
compelling business reason to do
Yeah. It's
this.
really good. Well, I'll give you an example. Like two things. One is for the Sales Enablement Collective, I did a sales coaching course a year and a half ago and had a blast doing it. And one of my modules is just about how do you enable leaders to become better coaches and a framework around it and all this other stuff. But your point was like, theoretically speaking, or ideally speaking, I should say, not theoretically, it would be awesome if all the managers had all the time in the world to be able to actually coach, but they don't, because they're doing all this other stuff and trying to burn fires.
Yeah.
But when you have an expert, because most leaders of sales have had experience and they're there because they're usually good at sales.
Yes.
If they can have what they need, so they can really fine tune like a surgeon and jump into a deal and actually help, because there's pieces of AI that may suggest I could do a call transcript and have AI be trained on methodology and give me a summary of it and things to look for. But it's my magic as a sales coach and come in and be like, okay, I've gone through this before. I know what to do with this. That comes from years of experience in sales that AI doesn't have, And it's just because that human part, it's the human to human interaction. But if I can complement that with insights from an AI tool, then that's when I become really dangerous in a good way as a manager, so I can help them understand that. And it's nice because some of the feedback is not always based on me. It's like, this is what the data is telling me. I'm not personally attacking you. This is just the data.
Right.
So it's not so much it's not an ego trip between a manager or human to human experience. It's just like, let's just talk about how we can improve it, based on the data.
I mean, the thing is now with prompt engineering and training LLMs, part of what you said, part of the chops that those leaders have in their brains from years of doing it, that can be put into the brain of your coach. That can be trained and prompt into the AI. So we can even do some of that, some of the really good stuff, the best practice. Not only can we, it's being done, we're doing it. And so that's doable. So we can, I was talking to someone once that said, AI can be the smartest, hardest working coach you've ever met in your life. And it's true. You can take all the best practices of all your coaches, put it collectively in the brain of your AI coach, and then have that executed against. And I think there is, and it can be done in context. I think a lot of people think about AI coaching as kind of general coaching skills, or aggregating data from the CRM and saying, okay, I'm going to coach you. These are the 5 you should go do these things with. You can get a level deeper. You can get contextualized. A coach can help you leverage your value against a competing alternative in Asia Pac, where it's different than it is in EMEA. Like all of this is available now. That's all the enabling technology that's going to shift a lot of what we're talking about.
Yep. I totally agree. And by the way, I hope I didn't infer that couldn't happen, because I know that is happening. Like, I've done it. It's just like, I think people don't understand that it's because hearing that, you could say, well, then why need a coach at all if AI can do everything you can do and better, But that to me is like, until AI buys from AI, you'll probably want to have a human involved at some point.
Completely, fundamentally agree. And that's again where the data is proving out to say you'll get a lift when you combine those two, and it optimizes the sales leader's time. And that's where we get to the real chops the sales leader has, because we can automate a bunch of the basics. Yeah, this is cool. I love what we're talking about. It's really fun, and we may have to do it again, because I feel like we can double and triple click on a few of these things. But I really appreciate it, Jonathan. Thank you.